Welcome the anointed ones. The most dangerous person in the room is the one who figured out the game but keeps smiling like they didn't. Let that marinate. Because chosen one, when you caught on to their manipulative little maze of mental gymnastics and didn't flinch, you didn't just ruin their plan, you ruined their identity. See, some people don't know who they are without someone to control. You were their puppet, their project, their plaything. But you went off script. And now they're panicking like the Wi-Fi went out during a Zoom job interview. Here's the truth. Psychological manipulation isn't random. It's patterned, rehearsed, and predictable. In fact, psychologists have found that toxic people often repeat the same three-stage cycle: idealize, devalue, discard. But what happens when their victim catches on before Act 2 finishes? Boom! Identity crisis. They didn't expect you to develop spiritual infrared vision. They didn't expect you to read the room while smiling through the warfare. And they definitely didn't expect you to stop dancing to their invisible music and start conducting your own symphony. Now they're upset. No, scratch that. They're unraveling. Because you exposed the one thing they fear most. You saw them and stayed calm. Stick around, because what we're about to unpack is going to feel like watching your favorite psychological thriller. Except this time, you're not the one getting played. You're the one who saw the director behind the curtain and decided to walk off set. Number one, they never expected you to decode the trap while still inside it. They never expected you to decode the trap while still inside it. That's what's burning them the most. See, most people only realize they were being manipulated after the damage has been done. After the breakdown, after the betrayal, after the meltdown. That's the usual timeline, but not you. You woke up in the middle of the game while the pieces were still moving, and you realized exactly what was happening. You didn't need to escape to see clearly. You saw it while still sitting at the table, and that shook them to the core. They were banking on your confusion. They were banking on the idea that you'd be too emotionally tangled, too loyal, too trusting, or too tired to question anything. You weren't supposed to wake up. You were supposed to comply, crumble, and carry guilt that didn't even belong to you. That was the plan, but instead, you kept your eyes open while enduring the pressure and started connecting dots they worked very hard to scatter. That moment you said nothing, but saw everything. That's when the power flipped. They could feel it. Suddenly their jokes weren't funny anymore. Their passive-aggressive jabs didn't land the same. Their silence treatments and manipulative tactics stopped working because your spirit had clicked into place. And once that happens, there's no going back. You didn't just see the trap. You understood how it was built. You spotted the timing, the patterns, the psychological bait. You realized they weren't just being moody or complicated, they were strategic. They had a script. And it wasn't built on love, it was built on control. And here's the twist. You didn't even need to confront them to make them unravel. Your awareness alone started applying pressure, because now they're the ones on edge. Now they're the ones who feel seen, exposed, and off balance. Your stillness became a mirror. And they can't stand what they see reflected back. The reason they're upset isn't just because you caught on, it's because you caught on too early, before they got what they wanted, before the damage was irreversible, before they had the last word. And now, they don't know what you'll do with what you know, and that's the part they truly can't handle. Number two, you didn't react. You rewired your understanding mid-battle. You didn't react how they expected. And that's what's driving them mad. They set the stage for chaos. They baited you, poked at your triggers, pushed your buttons, all expecting an emotional outburst, a meltdown, a dramatic response they could point to and say, "See, I told you they were unstable." But you didn't give them what they wanted. Instead of reacting, you recalibrated. Right there in real time, you changed the way you saw everything, and that threw them completely off. They were used to the old version of you. The one that would explain, over-explain, apologize for things that weren't your fault, try to fix what they kept breaking. That version made their manipulation easy, predictable, comfortable. But somewhere in the middle of the chaos, you went silent, not out of defeat, but because your mind was sharpening. You weren't broken. You were processing. And when you came back, you didn't come back the same. You didn't argue. You didn't defend yourself. You didn't beg for clarity or validation. You just saw the game, recognized the setup, and took your energy back. That's not just maturity, that's a spiritual upgrade. You weren't trying to win the argument anymore, you were trying to win your peace. And that's when the power flipped. They're uncomfortable now because they can't figure you out. You used to be an open book, now you're unreadable. They throw shade, you don't flinch. They go quiet to get a reaction, you stay unbothered. They twist the narrative and you just remove yourself from the conversation altogether. That scares them because it means the game is over and they lost. See, the real pressure isn't on you anymore, it's on them. Because the moment you stopped reacting, they had to face their own behavior without your emotional feedback to hide behind. Now they have to sit with the fact that they can't control you. And without control, their tactics fall apart. They underestimated how dangerous self-awareness is. They thought the real threat was your voice. But the truth is, the most powerful thing you did wasn't speak. It was the moment you shifted your perspective mid-battle and chose to protect your peace instead of performing for their dysfunction. That's the moment everything changed, and they felt it. Number 3, they got addicted to a version of you that wasn't awake. They got attached to a version of you that wasn't fully awake. That's the part they don't say out loud. The version of you that used to second-guess yourself. The one that overextended, over-apologized, and over-explained. The one that believed the best in everyone, even when the evidence said otherwise. That version of you was easy to manipulate, easy to control, easy to impress. And they built their comfort around that version of you, but that version is gone now. You didn't just grow, you woke up. Something in you clicked. You stopped giving them the benefit of the doubt and started giving yourself the benefit of truth. And truth changed everything. You stopped entertaining the drama. You stopped buying into their fake narratives. You started asking questions they never wanted you to ask. Especially the ones that started with, why am I still putting up with this? That shift didn't just throw them off, it shook them. Because they weren't addicted to your love. They were addicted to your lack of boundaries. Your loyalty made their manipulation easier. Your softness gave them room to dominate, but now that you've started choosing yourself, they feel abandoned, even though it was never your job to carry them in the first place. What they're really upset about is that they no longer have access to the version of you who tolerated their nonsense. The version who stayed silent to keep the peace. The version who let them rewrite the truth and still showed up like nothing happened. That version made them feel powerful. This new version makes them feel exposed. They miss your blind loyalty. They miss the emotional access they no longer have. They miss how easy it used to be to confuse you. But most of all, they miss the feeling of being in control. That feeling is gone now. You outgrew the shell they were feeding off of. You outgrew the role they cast you in, and they can't manipulate what they can't reach anymore. So yes, they're upset. But it's not about you changing. It's about you waking up to who you really are. You're no longer playing the role they wrote for you. You're living in truth now. And that's something they were never prepared for. Number 4. Their manipulation needed you to doubt yourself. But you've become self-certified. They needed you to doubt yourself. That was the whole foundation of their manipulation. If they could make you second-guess your memory, your instincts, your decisions, even your emotions, they could control the narrative. They didn't always do it loud or obvious either. It was in the sideways comments, the backhanded compliments, the "are you sure" questions that made you start questioning everything, even when you were right. They wanted your confidence unstable, your trust in yourself shaky, your inner voice muted. Because as long as you needed them to tell you who you were, they could stay in charge. That's how manipulators work. They don't always overpower you physically. They slowly dismantle your sense of self, piece by piece, until you rely on them to interpret your own reality. But that version of you no longer exists. The one who needed permission, the one who constantly apologized, the one who asked for clarity just to be gaslit again. That version is gone. You stopped outsourcing your worth to people who never had the right to define it. You stopped waiting for validation from people who were threatened by your growth in the first place. Now your confidence isn't built on compliments. It is built on clarity. You became self-certified. You started trusting your intuition. You began standing on what you know, not just what you feel. And that shift, it broke their hold on you completely. Because without your self-doubt, they have nothing left to grab onto. No more emotional levers to pull. No more cracks to sneak through. No more confusion to exploit. They hate that they can't guilt you anymore. They hate that you do not jump at every accusation or try to fix what they intentionally broke. They hate that you can walk away without defending your peace. That's what eats at them. Not just that you got stronger, but that you no longer need them to tell you who you are. Your confidence now comes from source. It is internal, not reactive. And that makes you unshakable. Because once you know who you are, their manipulations become obvious and ineffective. They can try the same tricks, but the spell is broken and they know it. Number 5. You saw through the charisma and recognized the calculations. At first, their charisma seemed genuine. They knew exactly how to talk, how to smile, how to say just enough to pull you in without raising suspicion. The compliments felt warm. The jokes felt familiar. The stories they shared made you feel like they were opening up to you. But over time, something started to feel off. You couldn't quite name it at first, but deep down, your spirit was picking up the disconnect between their words and their energy. They weren't being open, they were being calculating. That vulnerability you thought was real, it was rehearsed, selective, shared just enough to gain your trust. Not because they wanted to connect, but because they needed a foothold in your mind. It was all part of the act. Charm was their costume. Affection was their bait. And once they had your trust, the real agenda began. What threw them off was that you didn't stay blinded by the surface. You kept paying attention. You started noticing the patterns, the timing, how their kindness only showed up when they needed something, how the compliments were often followed by control. You saw how their so-called deep conversations weren't about bonding, but about gathering data to use later. You saw through the charisma and exposed the calculation. And that makes you dangerous to them, not because you attack them, but because you recognize them. You stopped confusing charm with character. You stopped mistaking performance for authenticity. You saw the difference, and that's something they can't undo. Now they're nervous around you because you're no longer impressed by their mask. You don't lean in when they get emotional. You don't fall for the fake apologies or the sudden growth moments they perform when they feel you pulling away. You've seen behind the curtain, and now the illusion doesn't work. They can feel the shift. They can sense the quiet awareness in your energy. And it unsettles them, because deep down they know they've lost control of the narrative. You see them now. Not the version they presented, but the one they were trying to hide. And nothing threatens a manipulator more than someone who knows how to tell the difference between sincerity and strategy. Number 6, you disarmed them by refusing to compete in their psychological Olympics. They wanted a reaction. That's what all the little jabs, backhanded compliments, guilt trips, and silent treatments were for. Every move they made was calculated to keep you tangled in emotional competition. They wanted to bait you into defending yourself, proving yourself, or trying harder to win their approval. It wasn't about love, it was about leverage. And for a while you played along, not because you were weak, but because you were trying to make the relationship work. You didn't see it as a game. You saw it as miscommunication, conflict, or misunderstanding. But at some point, you stopped engaging. You stopped trying to explain what they already knew. You stopped accepting invitations to drama disguised as conversations. You stopped jumping through hoops that kept changing. You realized that it wasn't about clarity or resolution. It was about control. And the second you pulled your energy out of the ring, their whole strategy collapsed. They couldn't handle your peace. Your silence wasn't confusion, it was clarity. Your refusal to compete wasn't passivity, it was power. You weren't ignoring them, you were dismantling them. Because mind games can only work if there's someone on the other end feeding the tension. Once you chose not to compete, they had no one to perform for. No audience, no power source. That's when the panic set in, because without your reaction, they had to sit with their own reflection. The stage they built for you to unravel on turned into a spotlight on their own behavior. And they hated what it showed. They weren't ready to face their manipulation without your participation to justify it. You pulled the plug on the show, and now they're left with the awkward silence that follows when the game is exposed but no one's playing anymore. They keep trying to provoke something, but you've leveled up. You don't flinch when they go cold. You don't rush to fix things they've sabotaged. You don't lose sleep over opinions rooted in control. And that, more than anything, is what broke the hold. You didn't win by arguing louder. You won by not showing up to the match at all. You reclaimed your peace. And in doing so, you forced them to finally meet themselves. And that's a confrontation they weren't prepared for. Number 7, you didn't just survive the gaslighting. You reverse engineered it. You didn't just survive the gaslighting. You decoded it. They thought they could twist your reality until you couldn't tell what was real anymore. They wanted to make you question your memory, your instincts, and even your sanity. Every lie was delivered with confidence. Every denial was calculated. They would change the story 1 minute and act like you were the one being forgetful the next. It was a slow unraveling designed to make you turn against yourself. But you didn't stay confused. You started taking mental notes. You began noticing how their version of events always shifted when they were backed into a corner. You saw how they dodged accountability by flipping everything back on you. You caught on to how they used charm when they sensed you pulling away, and how they played victim when their control was slipping. You didn't just see the pattern, you tracked it. Instead of falling apart, you pieced the entire system together. You reverse engineered the manipulation. You saw the blueprint behind their tactics. You figured out the timing, the language, the triggers they targeted. You stopped absorbing blame and started collecting evidence. And no, not always physical evidence, spiritual evidence. Your intuition became sharper. Your discernment got louder. You no longer needed an apology to validate your truth. They're not just angry that you got out, they're afraid. Afraid because you now know exactly how their game works. Afraid because you could explain it to someone else. Afraid that your clarity could expose them, especially to people who still think they're innocent. Because nothing terrifies a manipulator more than someone who not only escaped, but understood the playbook. You're not a victim of gaslighting anymore. You're the one who saw the wires behind the performance. You're the one who kept your mind intact while they were trying to make you doubt your own name. And now they know the dynamic has permanently shifted. They can't lie the same way. They can't charm the same way. They can't twist your words anymore. The spell is broken and they feel it. And deep down they know someone like you doesn't just walk away quietly. Someone like you shines light on the things people aren't supposed to see. Number 8, they can't weaponize your empathy anymore. You've aimed it toward yourself. They used to count on your empathy. That was their backdoor into your life. Every time they messed up, they knew you'd understand. Every time they disrespected you, they counted on your soft heart to explain it away. They turned your compassion into a tool of manipulation. They didn't want you to be heartless. They just wanted your heart to work in their favor. And for a while, it did. You gave second chances, third chances, silent forgiveness, and emotional labor they never earned, not because you were weak, but because you were wired to care. You wanted to believe people could change. You wanted to see the best in them. You assumed that if you just loved hard enough, they'd meet you halfway. But the truth is, they never intended to meet you at all. They were never in it for healing. They were in it for power. What they didn't expect is that you'd stop giving all your love away and finally start keeping some of it for yourself. You stopped putting yourself last in the name of being a good person. You stopped carrying their emotions like they were your responsibility. You realized that real empathy doesn't mean sacrificing yourself. It means having compassion with boundaries. And that change shook everything. Now your empathy is no longer a weakness they can exploit. It's a weapon of discernment. You still care, but now you care with wisdom. You listen, but you don't absorb. You forgive, but you don't forget the patterns. You show grace, but not at the cost of your own dignity. And that shift, that's what scares them. They can't guilt you anymore. They can't cry on cue and expect access. They can't spin a sad story and watch you drop everything to rescue them. You've stopped performing emotional CPR on people who keep choosing self-destruction. That boundary is like a locked door to a manipulator, because without access to your compassion, they can't control the story. You've aimed your empathy inward now. You protect yourself with the same tenderness you once gave to everyone else. And when a narcissist sees that, when they realize the weapon they once used is now your shield, they know the game is over. Number 9, you turned the emotional labyrinth into a blueprint for liberation. They built the chaos on purpose. The confusion wasn't an accident, it was the plan. They kept shifting the goalposts, changing the rules, twisting your words and flipping blame until you didn't know which way was up. One day they'd act like your biggest supporter, the next like your enemy. That emotional whiplash wasn't random. It was meant to keep you disoriented, always second-guessing, always off balance. That way you'd stay in the maze, chasing peace they had no intention of giving you. But you started paying attention. Somewhere in the middle of the mess, you began to see the pattern. You realized the love bombing always came after you pulled away. The apologies only came when they feared losing access. The compliments were thrown in just enough to keep you hooked. None of it was real connection. It was control disguised as care. You didn't just escape that emotional labyrinth, you studied it. You mapped the entire thing. You figured out where the traps were, where the exits were hidden, and which turns kept leading back to the same cycles. You weren't just trying to survive anymore, you were preparing to walk out with clarity. And that's exactly what you did. Now you have a blueprint, you know the signs, you know the tactics, you know the energy behind the mask. You can spot manipulation faster, with less effort, and without needing it to get worse first. That kind of clarity is powerful, and it's dangerous to anyone who depended on your confusion to feel in control. They're not just mad that you left. They're unsettled because you left with understanding. You didn't just walk away quietly. You figured out how the whole system worked. That means you're not just free, you're a threat. Because you could teach someone else. You could speak on what most people are still too afraid to name. You turned pain into a map. You turned confusion into wisdom. You turned gaslighting into clarity. And now they can't play those games with you ever again. The throne they sat on was built on your disorientation, but now that you're standing in truth, the whole thing is crumbling, and they feel it. Number 10, you outgrew the version of yourself they could control. They never had real power over you. What they had was access to a version of you that still needed their validation. That version of you was always trying to prove you were enough, always trying to be liked, accepted, and understood. Always shrinking a little just to avoid conflict. And that version gave them a doorway, because as long as you were chasing their approval, they could dangle it like a prize and control your every move. They didn't lead with authority, they led with your insecurity. The moment you started questioning your worth, they positioned themselves as the answer. And you didn't see it right away because you thought they had wisdom or experience or love. But what they really had was leverage, over your younger, less healed self. The one who still needed external permission to stand tall, but that version of you no longer exists. You've grown, you've healed, you've stopped outsourcing your value to people who only saw you as useful when you were dependent. Now your identity doesn't shift based on who's around you. Your self-worth isn't on the table anymore. You don't ask, am I enough? You know you are, and that's what broke their grip. Their control was never rooted in strength. It was rooted in your lack of clarity. But now that you've evolved, they have nowhere to anchor that manipulation. You're no longer reactive to their silence. You're not motivated by their praise. You're not unsettled by their disapproval. In fact, their opinion has lost its weight entirely. What you're seeing now is their grief. Not grief over you as a person, but grief over the power they no longer hold. Their access is gone. Their tactics are outdated. The scripts they used to use don't land anymore. You're not fighting them, you've simply outgrown them. They keep trying to engage with an old version of you that no longer lives here. And that's where the frustration comes from. They're yelling into an empty room, pulling strings that no longer exist. And the silence they hear back isn't passive, it's proof that their reign is over. You've stepped into a higher version of yourself. And in that space they no longer have a role. And number 11, you recognize that their mind games were a cry for relevance. Their mind games were never about building something real. They weren't trying to grow with you, love you, or understand you. What they really wanted was to stay relevant in your emotional world. Every manipulation, every hot and cold behavior, every confusing conversation, it all served one purpose: to keep your attention locked on them. Even if it was negative attention, it still meant they were the center of your emotional universe. And for someone with a fragile sense of self, that was everything. They used confusion as a leash. As long as you were trying to figure them out, trying to fix things, or trying to decode their behavior, they knew they still mattered to you. The mind games weren't random, they were rehearsed. If they sensed you pulling away, they would suddenly act vulnerable or apologetic. If they felt you getting stronger, they would provoke you just enough to pull you back into a cycle. It wasn't love. It was a strategy to remain emotionally significant, even if it cost your peace. But you caught on. You started noticing that the arguments always started when you were finally happy. You realized they never wanted resolution, just reaction. You saw that every moment of connection was followed by an act of control, and once you understood that, your attention shifted. You no longer took the bait. You stopped overanalyzing their behavior. You stopped trying to explain your worth to someone who was intentionally trying to blur it. And that's what broke them. You disconnected, not with anger, not with revenge, but with clarity. You stopped giving them what they wanted most, your mental and emotional energy. Without that, they feel like they're disappearing, because being in your thoughts, even as the villain, was their only form of significance. Now that you're not engaging, not reacting, not caring, they feel invisible, and they hate that, because deep down, their manipulation wasn't about power, it was about fear, fear of being irrelevant, fear of being seen for what they really are when no one's focused on them. That's why they're lashing out now. It's not because you hurt them, it's because you stopped feeding the illusion. And for someone who depends on attention to feel alive, that silence feels like death. Number 12, you broke the illusion without announcing it. You didn't make a scene. You didn't throw everything on the table and demand accountability. You didn't start an argument, write a long explanation, or announce your exit with dramatic flair. You just shifted quietly, internally. And that subtle shift is exactly what has them unsettled. They expected a meltdown, they expected confrontation, tears, maybe even a final argument to keep the game going a little longer. That's how their other situations usually play out. But you didn't give them any of that. You didn't give them closure, not because you were being petty, but because you didn't need it anymore. You didn't need answers. You didn't need validation. The truth settled in your spirit, and that was enough. You saw through them, and you never said a word. That's what shook them. The fact that one day you were emotionally invested, trying to fix things, trying to understand, and the next day you weren't. You were still present, but your energy had shifted. You weren't playing anymore. You were observing, detached, free, and they could feel it. That's when the panic began. Because they don't know what you saw. They don't know how much you figured out. They don't know if someone told you if you had a spiritual awakening, or if you just finally put the pieces together, and the not knowing is driving them crazy. Your calm makes them nervous. Your silence feels loud, because they can sense that the game is over, but they don't know how it ended. They can't fix what they can't see, and now that you're not feeding them with reactions or explanations, they're left with their own paranoia. It's like watching a magician realize the audience knows the trick, but no one's saying how. You broke the illusion without making a scene. That takes strength. Because real power doesn't always announce itself, it just moves differently. And now, every calm breath you take, every boundary you enforce, every bit of peace you maintain without involving them, is a quiet reminder that the spell they cast no longer works. You didn't just walk away, you walked above it. And they're still trying to figure out how and when you stopped being theirs to manipulate. Number 13. You became the unreadable variable in their carefully calculated equation. They thought they had you figured out. They studied you like a blueprint, watching how you reacted under pressure, how you handled silence, how you responded to guilt, and which buttons triggered you the fastest. It wasn't just manipulation, it was calculation. Every move they made was based on the patterns they observed in you. And for a while it worked. You were predictable. You were emotionally accessible. You moved in ways they could prepare for, anticipate, and exploit. But something changed. You stopped moving from habit and started moving from awareness. You stopped reacting on impulse and started responding with intention. You stopped explaining yourself to people who were only listening to manipulate. And that shift made you unreadable to them. Now you operate from wisdom, not emotion, from discernment, not desperation. Your responses no longer follow the old script. One moment you're silent, the next you're gone. One day you forgive, the next you vanish from reach. You don't argue, you don't prove, you don't beg, you just move. And that throws everything off for someone who needs predictability to stay in control. They don't know how to engage you anymore. The guilt tactics don't land. The passive-aggressive comments fall flat. The charm doesn't charm. Nothing gets the old version of you to show back up, and it's frustrating them to no end. Because without knowing what you'll do next, they can't stay 2 steps ahead anymore. You became the unpredictable variable in their carefully constructed plan. Their strategy relied on you being emotionally consistent. It relied on the fact that you would keep trying, keep talking, keep giving. But now you've tapped into divine timing, spiritual clarity, and higher self-respect. You move when led, not when pushed. You engage when aligned, not when baited. They can't play chess with someone who isn't even on the board anymore, and they know it. Your unpredictability isn't chaos, it's elevation. You're no longer functioning from the level they once accessed. You're not reacting from wounds, they've become wisdom. And that kind of growth can't be manipulated, predicted, or contained. They're still trying to decode you using the old manual, but you've upgraded and they're stuck trying to solve a puzzle that no longer exists. Number 14. Your stillness is no longer submission, it's authority. They thought your silence meant you were scared, that you had nothing to say, that you were weak, confused, or defeated. They assumed your stillness was a pause they could fill with more manipulation, more control, more gaslighting. But they misread you completely. What looked like submission was actually strategy. What felt like retreat was actually recalibration. You weren't afraid. You were choosing not to waste your breath on people who had already decided not to listen. You were done explaining yourself to people who twisted your words, done arguing with people who only wanted a reaction, not resolution. You chose silence, not out of fear, but out of power. Because when you reached a certain level of understanding, you realized peace is louder than any argument. And now they don't know what to do with you. You're not pleading, you're not defending, you're not engaging, you're just present, with your energy protected, your boundaries firm, and your spirit still. And that stillness, it speaks louder than any confrontation they were hoping to pull you into, louder than any accusation they throw, louder than the chaos they're trying to provoke. Your silence is not empty, it's full of authority. It carries the weight of someone who knows exactly what they're dealing with and chooses not to stoop to it. It's the calm of someone who has already decided what their peace is worth. And that's why it's crushing them. Because the moment you stopped reacting, they lost control. And the moment you stopped talking, they lost access. Now every quiet move you make is a statement. Every boundary you keep without explanation. Every time you don't respond to the bait. Every time you walk away without turning back. That stillness echoes. It unsettles them because it's proof that you no longer need their approval, their version of events, or their presence to validate your power. They underestimated what silence really is. It's not the absence of a voice, it's the presence of sovereignty. It's the declaration that you no longer negotiate with manipulation. And once you reach that level, the game stopped being fun for them because now they're yelling into silence. And all that noise, it's just the sound of their power slipping away. In the end, chosen one, what they feared most wasn't your anger, it was your awakening. You didn't fight for the spotlight, argue for closure, or demand justice with noise. You simply evolved. You outgrew the version of yourself they could control. You silenced their power without saying a word. You turned their mind games into stepping stones. You didn't just survive the manipulation, you mastered its anatomy. And now you move with a quiet authority that shakes them more than any outburst ever could. Your growth exposed their game, your peace stripped away their power, and your detachment became the loudest truth they've ever had to face. So walk boldly in this new season. You are no longer reacting, you're reigning, no longer questioning, and no longer bound. You're dangerously free. If this word hit your spirit, don't keep it to yourself. Let it echo, like this video, if it spoke truth to your journey. Drop a comment below and let me know which part hit hardest. I read every single one. Share this with someone who's waking up to their own power. You never know whose freedom your share could trigger. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because this isn't just content, it's confirmation. We're not just surviving anymore. We're walking in spiritual intelligence, emotional clarity, and divine authority. Let's keep rising together. God bless you.